Megan had never thought of herself as someone who was easily frightened. After all, she'd grown up with two brothers who took every opportunity to try and scare her, so she considered herself tough. But that was before she moved into the old house at the end of Elm Street, a quiet place with tall trees that cast shadows over her yard. The rent was cheap, and she couldn't say no. At first, she noticed small things. The strange smell in the basement, the drafts that made her shiver, even with all the windows closed, and the odd creaks and groans the house made in the dead of night. But, she told herself, old houses had quirks, and it was probably just the pipes. She brushed off each unusual sound until one night, when things changed. She was lying in bed, struggling to fall asleep when she heard it, a faint tapping, like something or someone was slowly knocking on a wall. She checked her phone. 2:45 a.m. The tapping stopped. Megan lay there, frozen, straining her ears for any hint of sound. Minutes passed in silence, and she finally convinced herself it was just the house settling. But the next night, it happened again, only this time louder and more deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. It seemed to be coming from the basement stairs. The sound grew louder, each tap echoing in her head like a countdown. Megan didn't sleep that night. She stayed awake, clutching her phone, wondering if she should call the police but feeling too embarrassed to report something so strange. After a week of sleepless nights, she finally decided she had to know. She waited until she heard the tapping start again, then crept down the stairs. Her flashlight trembled as she moved, illuminating dusty, forgotten boxes. She reached the basement door and noticed that it was open just a crack. Megan froze. She was sure she had locked it. She pushed it open and peered into the darkness. Nothing. No intruder. No one hiding in the shadows. She sighed with relief, convinced she was losing her mind. But the next night, desperate to solve the mystery, she set up her phone to record, propping it up to capture anything near the basement door. The following morning, she reviewed the footage. It started as she'd expected, an empty hallway in dim light. But as she fast-forwarded through the video, her heart suddenly stopped. At around 2:47 a.m., a figure emerged from the darkness of the basement, a shadowy silhouette that crept up the stairs. It paused at the top, lingering just inches from her bedroom door. Megan watched in horror as the figure seemed to lean in, almost as if it was listening to her breathing through the door. Then it turned and slinked back down the stairs into the darkness, vanishing from sight. Megan couldn't believe what she was seeing. She packed her things and left that house within hours, leaving the footage as the only reminder of the horror she narrowly escaped. James didn't think twice about driving late at night. He'd spent his life on the road, going back and forth between towns, so late night drives were a norm. But this night felt different. The sky was pitch black, with no moon to guide him, and a strange fog clung to the trees that lined the empty back road his GPS had suggested as a shortcut. It was well past midnight when he first noticed the figure. A shadowy outline stood by the side of the road, tall and still, shrouded by mist. He blinked, shaking his head, but when he glanced back in the rearview mirror, the figure was gone. A chill ran down his spine. Maybe it was his tired mind playing tricks, or maybe he was just paranoid from driving alone at this hour. But as he drove on, the feeling that he wasn't alone crept over him, pressing down on his chest. It was a silent presence, heavy and watchful, like a pair of eyes boring into him from the back seat. He resisted the urge to look back, gripping the wheel tighter and staring straight ahead. He thought about turning on the radio to break the silence, but his fingers wouldn't move from the steering wheel. 20 minutes later, he decided he couldn't take it anymore. He pulled over, parking under the flickering light of a deserted gas station, and turned around. The backseat was empty. James laughed to himself, relieved that he'd let his imagination get the best of him. But as he turned back to the front, he caught a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror, just a flash of a face, white and gaunt, staring back at him with hollow eyes. He whipped around, but the backseat was empty again. He tried to calm himself down, thinking it was a hallucination from lack of sleep. He started the car and took off, pushing the speed limit as he tried to get home as quickly as possible. The fog thickened, and he barely noticed the lights in the rearview mirror dimming. When he finally reached his driveway, he felt the overwhelming sense of being watched one last time. His hands shook as he opened the door and stumbled out, slamming it behind him. The next morning, he went to check his car, and his stomach dropped. There was a single handprint, pale and smudged, pressed against the inside of the rear windshield. After a long search, Liz finally found the perfect apartment. It was small but cozy, and she adored the freedom of living alone. The first few nights were peaceful, and she slept soundly, but then, the nightmares began. Each night, she dreamed of a figure standing over her bed, watching her in silence. The details were fuzzy, but the sensation of being observed was disturbingly vivid. Liz would wake up drenched in sweat, her heart pounding, but she always chalked it up to the stress of moving. One weekend, her boyfriend Matt came over and stayed the night. The nightmares seemed to worsen, but she didn't mention it, not wanting to worry him. The next morning, Matt gave her a strange look. "You were staring out the window last night," he said. "Just standing there. I called your name, but you didn't answer. I thought you were sleepwalking." Liz was shocked. She had no memory of getting up, let alone standing by the window. She laughed it off, but a sense of unease settled over her. That night, she decided to stay up and see if she really was sleepwalking. Around 3 a.m., she finally drifted off. The next morning, as she made her way to the kitchen, she noticed something strange, muddy footprints leading from her bed to the front door. She stared, frozen, as dread coursed through her veins. She never wore shoes in the apartment, and she certainly hadn't gone outside. Determined to get to the bottom of things, she set up a camera in her bedroom that night, angling it to capture her bed and the door. She couldn't sleep, but eventually, exhaustion took over. She woke up feeling groggy, barely remembering to check the camera footage. She watched herself tossing and turning, then sitting up abruptly around 3:07 a.m. She rose from the bed, walked to the window, and stood there, staring out into the darkness. Liz shivered as she continued watching. After a minute, something else appeared. A second figure, an exact replica of herself, stepped into view. Appearing to reach out and gently guide her back to bed, Liz turned off the camera, her heart racing. She never spent another night in that apartment, leaving behind the footage as the only evidence of her doppelganger.